In this video, we will show you how to replace your driver's side front CV axle assembly on this Ford Fusion. This will be located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Safely raise and support the front of the vehicle, we can start removing the wheel. To remove your wheel, you have 5 19mm lug nuts. We'll get those out of the way and we can remove this. Take hold of the wheel, remove it from the vehicle. Now that we have the wheel off, we can remove our 32mm axle nut from this area. With that removed, we'll continue with a hammer and punch directly in the center of the axle, separating this from the wheel bearing. Once you have movement from there, you can continue on. Now let's make our way down to where the control arm meets the knuckle. We have our ball joint here, and there's a pinch bolt holding the ball joint stud to that knuckle. We have to remove the pinch bolt and the mounting nut. The bolt head itself is a 15mm, and on the forward side, you'll have an 18mm mounting nut. A quick inspection of that. Continuing from here, you want to use some penetrant in between the slotted area of the knuckle on the ball joint stud. Next, we're going to separate this. You can use a small prying device in between the knuckle and the control arm, gently pulling down on the control arm, and then we'll have to carefully start pulling the knuckle away. If you find that you can't pull this down far enough to remove it from the knuckle, it's typically due to the forward bushing on the lower control arm. To cure this, we're going to remove our 21mm mounting bolt holding the control arm to the subframe. Next, we're going to shift the control arm out and away from the subframe. Just use a pry bar for this. Back over at the ball joint and the knuckle, we'll continue separating this. Under this area, let's dislodge our air deflector. It's held in place with a 10mm bolt. We'll follow this forward. We have another 10mm bolt. That should make it so we can flex this as necessary. Continuing from here, we're going to hold onto the axle and take hold of the caliper assembly here, and we'll start tugging them apart, pulling the axle out and forward from the wheel bearing. Continuing from here, we're going to have to use a pry bar and gently pry the axle away from the transmission. When doing so, it's a good idea to have a collection receptacle under this area, but also be extremely careful not to cause any damage to your transmission itself. Let's take hold of that axle, we'll pull it out of place. There it is, friend. With the axle out of place, the next thing you need to do is clean and inspect the seal on the transmission itself. If it looks like it's torn, worn, or damaged, replace it. Just going to give this a quick wipe. Still soft and pliable. We'll use some petroleum jelly directly on the seal here. That'll help the new axle slide into place easily. Okay, friend, let's prepare to install our brand new axle. Start getting this in place. We're being careful for our seal. When installing the axle, you need to make sure you drive it in as far as possible so it's completely bottomed out against the transmission. Once you feel as though you've confirmed that, take hold of the axle and try pulling it out and away from the transmission. It should be locked in. If it slides out, it's not properly locked in. Now, feeling along this area, I can feel that it is seated and it's locked in. Continuing from here, it's time to put the axle shaft into the backside of the wheel bearing. When doing so, be extremely careful not to cause any damage to the wheel bearing itself. We'll gently start flexing this knuckle and wheel bearing assembly away and bring this into position. Now we can start reattaching the forward bushing on the control arm to the subframe. If it's not lined up, go ahead and use your awl. We'll get this aligned and start in the mounting bolts. Do not tighten this. We have our bolt with our blue thread locker. Move this around as necessary. We're going to start this in, but leave it loose. Let's gain focus on reattaching the ball joint to the steering knuckle. For this, we're going to take hold of the control arm. We'll carefully pull it down and slide everything into position. Now it's time for the pinch bolt, holding the ball joint stud to that knuckle. This comes through from the rear towards the front, and I like to use some blue thread locker. Start that mounting nut on there. Now before we tighten any of the hardware, let's make sure we apply upward support on the lower control arm, essentially bringing the suspension into ride height position. Let's start with the pinch bolt. We'll snug this up and torque it to 76 foot-pounds. Now let's move to the forward mounting bolt. For this, we're going to snug it and torque it to 159 foot-pounds. Go ahead and remove support from under your control arm. It's time to reattach our lower shield. Let's press this into position. Start on our mounting bolt and snug it up. Continue rearward for our next mounting bolt. Now it's time to resecure the axle to the hub here. Get the nut on. When installing the nut, you'll find that it only turns so far before it starts turning this entire thing. The easiest way to tighten this is to use a pry bar diagonally across the studs all the way down to the ground, preventing this from turning on you. When you go to tighten this nut, never use an impact gun, only use hand tools. The torque for this is 148 foot-pounds. Now it's time to install our front wheel. We'll get this in place. Start on all 5 of our 19mm lug nuts. Once we have them bottomed out, get the wheel safely back on the ground and torque each of them to 100 foot-pounds. With the wheel safely back on the ground, we'll be torquing these in a crisscross manner to 100 foot-pounds. Torqued. Okay friend, we finished our front axle. At this point, you want to go ahead and take your vehicle for a road test, make sure you don't have any ABS lights on the dash, and check for leaks. Aside from that, thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.